Welcome to the Thriving Scapegoat, a podcast for women who are cast as the problem, when in truth, they were the truth tellers. I'm your host, Julie Cielo, somatic coach, author, and guide for women healing from complex trauma, family enmeshment, and the invisible wounds of being scapegoated. If you ever felt misunderstood, exiled, or blamed for dynamics you didn't create, if you've done the deep work to break the generational patterns and you're ready to reclaim your voice, your body, and your life, you're in the right place. This is where we stop over-explaining, stop performing for love, and start living in alignment with what's real. Here, we talk about nervous system healing, shadow work, emotional sovereignty, and what it takes to not just survive your past, but thrive beyond it. Because you were never too much. You were never the problem. You were the disruption to the dysfunction, and now you get to become the woman who rises because of it. Let's begin. Hello, and welcome back to the Thriving Scapegoat. Before we get started today, I want to pause for a moment and just allow you to notice your body, your jaw, your shoulders, your breath. No need to change anything. Just notice. Because today, we're talking about something that completely changed how I understand myself. And honestly, how I understood healing in general. Parts. The different parts of ourselves that we become in order to survive. In the contradictory identities that live inside so many women from complex trauma. The part that wants intimacy, the part that wants to disappear, the part that wants to rest, the part that panics when thinking about rest and things get still, the part that craves softness, and then the part that trusts absolutely no one. I think many women secretly believe their contradiction means something is wrong with them. I know it did for me. But what if your contradiction is actually evidence of adaptation, of your survival? What if the fragmentation that you feel isn't dysfunction, but intelligence? Intelligence in the body. And that realization changed my life because for years I kept trying to become a better version of myself, more healed, more spiritual, more calm, more disciplined, more quiet, more evolved. Meanwhile, parts of me were exhausted and other parts were terrified. Parts still believed that love had to be earned through performance. And another part, if I'm being honest, wanted to disappear from the world entirely for a while. And I had to survive that feeling. And I think this is especially true for women who grew up in emotionally unpredictable environments. Women who became hypervigilant early on in life, parentified women, women who learned to monitor their moods, read rooms, read tension, silence, and emotional withdrawal. Women who became shapeshifters without realizing it. Because when survival is involved, the nervous system doesn't ask, who am I authentically? No, it asks, what do I need to become in order to stay connected? And that's where parts begin forming. We get fragmented, not because you're fake, but because you've adapted. And there's often a very capable part, a high-functioning part, an achiever, the caretaker, the one that everyone depends on and expects. I know that part intimately. And that part built businesses, and that part survived betrayal, and that part held everything together while my nervous system was quietly drowning underneath. Maybe you can relate. Because there was another part too. a deeply exhausted part that didn't get recognized, a lonely part, a part grieving years of self-abandonment and grief from not having proper family, a part that was furious that I had to spend so much of my life trying to earn from emotionally unavailable people, and that part got suppressed until perimenopause anyway. And honestly, for years, those parts were at war inside of me and I didn't even know it. One part kept saying, keep going, while another one says, I can't. One part craving connection, while another part deeply distrusting it and hiding out. One part wanting visibility, yet another part terrified of being perceived or judged at all. And this is where I think so much healing work falls short, because many approaches unconsciously teach women to exile the very parts of themselves that they developed to survive. The needy part, the angry part, the shut down part, the hypervigilant, the jealous, the grieving, the terrified part. But exiling parts isn't healing. That's internalized abandonment, and it just exacerbates a deep, deep wound. And that took me years to understand. It wasn't until I really lost everything. Because many women healing from CPTSD become incredibly good at abandoning themselves completely. They get a master's in it. Spiritually, intellectually, productively, we meditate our grief over, we journal over our rage, and we positive think over our loneliness. Meanwhile, the body still carries it all. And this is where somatic work changed everything for me. Because for the first time, I stopped. I stopped trying to become a perfected version of myself. I started becoming curious about the harsh inner critic and the parts underneath the behaviors that I couldn't understand why they weren't changing. And I remember realizing one day that this harsh inner critic was not actually trying to destroy me. It was actually trying to protect me. That was revolutionary. That changed everything. Because the harsh inner critic often develops in environments where mistakes felt unsafe, where rejection felt dangerous, where belonging was inconsistent. So the nervous system creates an internal surveillance in order to avoid pain. If I criticize myself first, maybe no one else will. If I keep myself at such a high standard, maybe I'll survive. That's not self-hatred originally, that's protection. And when women begin to understand this somatically instead of morally, compassion becomes possible. So I just want you to notice your body right now as you hear this. Is there a part of you that tightens when you hear this? A part that's resisting? A part that maybe is getting emotional? Maybe a part that feels relieved to know that you're okay, you're normal. That awareness matters because healing begins when we stop overriding the body long enough to actually listen. One of the biggest misunderstandings about trauma recovery is the belief that healing means becoming one consistent, perfect, integrated person. But humans are not singular, especially trauma survivors. We're layered, fluid, contradictory. And honestly, that's part of being human. The problem isn't that we have all these parts. The problem is that some of the parts become frozen in survival roles, disassociated. The over-functioning protector, the people pleaser, the disassociated observer, the hypersexual part perhaps, and the emotionally shut down part, the caretaker who never learned how to receive. And many women spend decades identifying entirely with this one protective part, building an identity around it, especially high-functioning women that are checking off boxes because society rewards that type of behavior in certain trauma adaptations. Hyper-independence gets praised, overworking gets praised, caretaking gets praised. Meanwhile, the nervous system underneath it all remains profoundly dysregulated. Why are we applauding this? This is also why healing can initially feel disorienting. And because survival patterns begin softening, parts that you haven't heard from in years begin emerging, especially in perimenopause. Grief, desire, anger, need, deep need, loneliness. And many women begin to panic during this phase, thinking, I'm getting worse. I'm going backwards in time. But no, your nervous system is just thawing. And that thawing process can feel incredibly vulnerable, especially after estrangement or divorce, burnout, loss. Because once survival slows down, that means that the body begins revealing what it could not safely process before. And I know after my divorce of 22 years marriage, an estrangement after an entire lifetime of taking care of family members and closing a business that I worked really hard on, these were seasons where I barely recognized myself, not to mention my first career that I left, not because I was becoming less healed, but because parts of me had been buried underneath decades of performance. These were finally surfacing and people were going away because I kept taking risks to become the next iteration. And honestly, there were moments where I deeply judged myself for that. Who am I to want more? Moments where I thought, should I be beyond this by now? But healing is not linear. Embodiment is not performance, no matter how many people you see doing that. And this is why seasonal somatics became so important to me. Because I realized that especially perimenopausal women with CPSD don't need another system teaching them to transcend themselves. Toxic positivity. Just, we don't need more spaces where humanity becomes more judged. We need safer spaces for the grieving parts, the sensual parts, the exhausted parts, the brilliant and terrified parts. Not to stay fragmented forever, but to stop waging war against ourselves internally. And this is where somatic work becomes profoundly different than mindset work alone. Because somatic works asks, what happens in your body when this part appears? Does your chest tighten? Does your breath shorten? Do you collapse, brace, or disassociate? Are you even aware of it? The body tells the truth long before the mind catches up. And the body doesn't respond well to shame. No. One thing I often tell women is you can't hate yourself into healing. You can't outperform your own self-esteem. And many women are trying to discipline themselves. And maybe if I get to a 15% body fat, then I will be enough. They try to heal themselves to be enough while secretly despising the parts of themselves that developed under pain and doing a lot of judging of other women around them in the process. But what if thriving isn't becoming your highest self or surrounding yourself with women that are boss bitches? What if thriving is learning how to stop abandoning the parts of yourself that survival created and starting to recognize who other people are that are doing that? The question alone shifted the direction of my life, because suddenly healing stopped being about self-improvement and who I could align with, and became relationship to my body, to the sensations and the grief and the boundaries and the truth and the relationship to my body. And something remarkable began happening. And this came after years and years of work. The parts inside of me stopped fighting. Not perfectly, but enough for peace and honesty and trust to emerge. And I think true thriving after trauma is quieter than people imagine. It's not flashy. It's not about being in the Range Rover up on the hills in the mansion. It's becoming internally congruent, no longer performing that your nervous system can barely sustain. No. So I want you to just place one hand somewhere on your body, maybe your chest or your ribs or your stomach, and just notice. There may be parts of you that still feel afraid, parts that are still protecting, embracing and grieving. And that doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. So take a deep breath into your belly and know that healing doesn't require abandoning those parts. Healing asks us to slow down enough to be safe enough to listen to them differently. And this is the work that I am devoted to through seasonal somatics. Not helping women become someone else, but helping you come back into relationship with yourself safely through embodiment, seasonal rhythm and community, breath work and nervous system healing and truth. So if this episode resonated with you, I invite you to explore Seasonal Somatics membership with me online and try a practice from the safety of your home. Join one of my women's circles in the growing community that we're building together. Not to trauma bond, but to thrive. You don't need to heal alone anymore. In the next episode, we're gonna go somewhere provocative. We're gonna talk about trauma science and how women's lived experiences relate to that, and why I believe women have spent centuries becoming nervous system experts just to survive the world that we've inherited. This is the Thriving Scapegoat, and this is where fragmentation slowly becomes wholeness. Thank you for being here.
If today's episode resonated, that's your entry point. Healing scapegoating isn't just insight, it's nervous system work. And this is what I teach through Seasonal Somatics, a body-based method that helps you regulate, reconnect, and move with real change. I offer weekly group classes, both in-person and online, immersive retreats, and limited one-on-one mentorship. You can find all the details in the show notes. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs it, and make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, choose truth over belonging, self-trust over self-abandonment. You didn't just survive this to stay stuck. You're here to thrive.